You're listening to Toronto's #1 real estate podcast, powered by Watson Estates. The most successful local real estate investing starts right here, right now. Here's your host, broker, investor, and social media influencer, Bradley Watson.
Good morning, investors. Bradley here from Watson Estates. And as we do every morning on our daily podcast here, we give you the latest news as it relates to the Toronto real estate market. And we all know this thing is coming quick. The news is flying in our faces. We used to do this weekly, but now we're doing it daily. And the news is keeping up. In fact, I can't keep up with the news. And so today we're going to talk about, is Toronto experiencing a correction or a crash? This comes from an article that was published by Toronto Stories. It was submitted by a real estate agent, but I also want to share with you the stats. And this, I know I've been promising this week we were going to get some kind of stats, and the reason for that was last month we got mid-month stats. But we have not gotten these stats, but I've been creative and I've been able to pull together some stats to share with you today to give some insight on what has been going on this month thus far. And then I want to talk about what happens to our market if we experience this thing called deflation. You know about inflation, that's when the government prints more money and essentially devalues our currency. But apparently, according to an article by Better Dwelling, deflation is also a problem for our real estate market. And we've just experienced our first deflation since September of 2009. So I want to share with you what their insights are and how that would affect our real estate prices. And then I want to wrap it up by talking about this comment that came from the Bank of Canada talking about our risks to the economy being overblown. Are people's concerns overblown? Is that true? And how exactly are these programs working to try and support and prop up the economy here in Canada to save the day? Now today, after we're done here, I'm going to be running out the door and driving to see a bunch of places from Vaughan to downtown Toronto. We got 4 showings, 2 of which require disclosures be signed. I got to sign the second one this morning. They're all asking for gloves and masks. And every time I put those gloves and masks, I guess the gloves not so much, but the mask, I feel like my voice is muffled. I'm a loud person, as you guys probably know by this point. And so anytime I put that mask on, it sounds like this. I am your realtor. Anyways, I feel like I'm from Star Wars walking in, especially when I press those automatic doors and they just kind of move and I hold my hand up. Makes me feel epic. I know my clients love when I do that. Just kidding. They think I'm weird. They love me anyways. We are #1 on Google Podcasts for Toronto real estate. We have fun every day, bring you the news that come out on our local market. And I'm learning to, in fact, this deflation article was a whole bunch of new information for me. Since I've started in real estate, I have not experienced deflationary prices. Because let's face it, I wasn't a realtor. I was 19 in 2000 and okay, you know what? Let's backtrack. I'm an old man now. Wealth of experience. No, in the real estate business, I've been in the business, I think about 8 years now, something like that. But so I haven't seen 2009, at least in my career as a realtor. Now I'm familiar with deflation, but I'm interested in hearing the negative side of it. So I'm learning too. And before we get into that category, let's talk about what's been going on in our marketplace. Since last weekend, I was so excited about this week, because the stats last month came out mid-month. So I was expecting we're going to get the same this month. But to my dismay, Friday came and here it is, and there still has not been any publication, at least from where I can see, from the Toronto Real Estate Board. But I didn't want to leave you guys hanging in the same way that I was left hanging, and I want to share with you, I was able to pull together some stats thanks to one of our listeners who commented. Zolo actually published stats up until May 19th. So they've done kind of a mid-month review. Now, they don't have everything, but they've got enough for us to get a feel for what's been happening up until, let's say, the 2nd to 3rd week of May 19th. So what we found in March 24th to April 21st, the average sold price was about $910. Since then, April 21st to May 19th, that price went up to $939. Now, historically, May is the highest price month for a home. Like when we look on the cycle of properties, consistently, when I've looked at the last 50 years, May makes up probably at least more than half of the like out of all the years where that month is the highest month selling. Now, of course, with fluctuations in price because of different things that we've seen happen, it's not a perfect formula, but generally May is the highest. So when we're comparing it at a yearly basis, we would expect that it would be more difficult to meet the numbers of last year, which is going to be important in a second. Now, from a monthly change, last month we saw a 9% decrease, right? From a monthly basis. And this is as far as price goes, right? So we're talking, if we're looking in March, we're talking from February to March. So the worst time we saw a 9% decrease. This is speaking to Toronto, by the way. This is all Toronto numbers. But this past month, April 21st to May 19th, that number is, you won't believe it, guys. We went from -9 to up 4.3% monthly change, okay? These numbers have not been published by TREB. These numbers have not been released. Many people have not seen this. So just so you know, as we've kind of been hinting at the fact that I thought we saw rock bottom about a month ago, we'll call it, right? I think we saw that maybe 2-3 weeks ago. We are on the upwards as far as monthly change in prices. And of course, people would say, oh, well, it's May from April. Of course, you're going to see price increases. But when we look at yearly, we see an increase as well. The yearly change from March 24th to April 21st, so about a month ago, was up 1%. And so people are like, oh, we're going to come, things are going to come crashing down. And we're with us looking at a backdrop of May, which is, again, the highest price month typically. And we're seeing still a yearly increase of 1.8%. So we're actually outperforming the growth speeds that we did last year, even with COVID-19 going on. Now, unfortunately, there's no months of inventory in these calculations. That's a one bummer and there's no reference of number of showings. They haven't tracked that, and that's a little bit harder to collect as well. But I've seen it in my office, showings going up, and I anticipate months of inventory to be coming down, but at least stay flat. It'll be interesting to see where that goes when those numbers do come out, but at least you have some insight. Prices are not falling, guys. They're not falling. That's what we're seeing in these stats. Now, the selling to listing price ratio, that sits at 98%. So in theory, if you're like, what kind of offers or deals can I get? On the average deal that you're getting in our marketplace is 98% of asking, just to give you a sense of that. And the average days on market still sits at 26 days, which people, that's always a skewed number, because if you sat on the market for 30 days, you might just take the listing down and relist it, and skews those numbers. But it gives you an idea that still 26 days on market is not that bad, right? Like, we're still in a seller's market. There's no question. So I wanted to share with you, given all of those things, there was an article that came out. It seems like it was an opinion piece that, I guess, Toronto Stories, they collect opinion pieces from whoever wants to submit them, and they review them. And if it's good enough, they publish it. So here's one that came from a guy named Baron Alloway. He is the executive director, sales representative of RIA Law State Realty Broker. So he's a sales rep. He's a realtor. Here's his article, and it has some interesting points, and I've learned something too, so that's why I wanted to share it with you. It's always important to separate fact from fiction. The real estate market is no exception to this rule. As news continues to circulate and rumors of a second, quote, Great Depression start to land alongside chilling allusions to the 2008 housing crisis, facts matter now more than ever. We'd like to use some data he pulls together these TREB stats. Despite the seemingly endless cries from pundits, COVID-19 is not 2008. So there's his point, is that we don't see 2008. But I really like the way he's reviewed this, and it's kind of cool. It's got a lot of charts, but I'll read the highlights and explain to you what I'm seeing. The dive taken by housing prices in the fall of 2008 was completely reversed within 3 months. So he's talking back to what happened in the collapse of 2008. In terms of the overall trend line, this depression seemed to be merely a blip on the radar. So like, you kind of get this, like, there's like a big adjustment, down, up, down, and it kind of flatlines out. 3 years later, prices were up over 50%, or 1.5 times from January 2008. So he's saying in the long term, we see that it rebounded. And I would say in Canada, we didn't see nearly the same bounces that we saw in the States. There were crazy bounces going on in the US, but it all ended up being this kind of flat trend line. It just seemed to be an extreme case in that moment. So then he's provided this little chart, which is quite interesting. So the article underneath it says, in the month of the crash, housing prices fell by about 20%. And we can kind of see that in the chart here. In order to rebound, they had to make a gain of double their losses. So here's a good point, guys. If you bring that price down 20%, in order to recuperate that, actually it'd be more as a percentage increase than 20% to rebound that full amount. Plus, if you're going to boom after that, it needs to be even more. So we actually saw a rebound of about 41% from when it went down in 2008. But what he points out to here in this chart is we can actually see, because you know how we kind of said there's a bounce down and then up and then it kind of trends back out. So the point that he brings in this article, which is interesting, is you see this increase, like this huge drop in price, right? Like an astronomical drop, like the one we've just seen, right? But then in 2008, we then see a massive rebound, this 40% increase in the matter of 3 months. But then in order to get back to our trend line, it doesn't stay there. It actually comes back down again to where it was floating before. So his point is actually interesting. He's saying what will happen here is you're going to get this like shock of price increase, but then you have this kind of second wave or second drop in prices. He calls it a second crash that we saw in 2008. So that I thought that was an interesting point. Like that's very valid. Like you get these extreme drops, extreme increases all the way up past where it was, but then you see this second crash that brings you back down to kind of where you started. Very interesting little view here. But then he he compares it against 2020. And this is where he kind of loses me a little bit, but he does say transaction volumes would indicate that the pandemic has not halted the market, but merely brought it back to its winter volumes. Simply put, it isn't 2008. So his point here is the prices were going up so quickly that now that we've had an adjustment, it's not the same as 2008 because we haven't seen significant declines. All we've done is kind of adjusted seasonally. Our spring market is being deferred, if you will. So the rest of his article is not very strong, so I won't kind of waste time on it. But I thought that was a very interesting point in looking at 2008. Like, I don't think this is 2008. I've never said I think it's 2008. It's not. We haven't seen that, and I kind of agree with you saying I don't like how he said it. I think we do a better job explaining it here on our podcast, and if you've been kind of following with us. But I do think that's an interesting point to think that you could have this, as prices are now going back up, this kind of slingshot, if you will, but then have them drop back down. What does that drop down look like? And if combined with a second wave, what would that look like? Like, we are in this very weird thing that we have no guidance. We have no history to lean on to figure out what's going to go on, which is leading to a whole bunch of questions, and questions by me and everybody, right? Like, everybody wants to know. It's why our podcast had record listens yesterday. Like, people want to know what's going on, and the news is not keeping up. Like, we're not getting enough news. As much as you're seeing crazy articles coming up, I think that we can't even touch, like, when I'm putting this podcast together each morning, it is very difficult for me to choose which articles we want, but I still think that there can be more writings on certain topics. As a perfect example, this next article from Better Dwelling, talking about this idea of deflation. I saw somebody talking about deflation. There was one article before that kind of was like, oh, Canada could experience some kind of deflation. And my response to that is cool, great, right? Like I don't like inflation. Like, I think it kills our currency. Like, you're printing money and the value of your dollar goes down. So when I think deflation, I think, oh, well, it's opposite of that. Like, my value of my money increases, right? And so my response, even now, is still kind of like, that sounds like a better thing than inflation in my mind. Now, real estate obviously does well in an inflationary environment, right? When interest rates are low. But this article was the first one I saw. Now, of course, Better Dwelling is the one that published it because they're the first to pull out this side of the equation every time. But I wanted to read through it and share with you what they're saying, because if deflation does become a trend, it's not a trend yet, but we just experienced 1 month of it. If it does become a trend, what could that mean in a worst case scenario? Like, I want to know what's the worst case scenario of deflation, because we've seen inflation, but what is deflation? So here's the article. Canadian households are facing a problem they didn't think was possible a few weeks ago: falling consumer prices. StatsCan data shows the consumer CPI, the Consumer Price Index, fell in April. This deflationary move is the first seen in Canada in over a decade. A month isn't a trend, but if it continues, the impact on heavily indebted households could be huge, and not in a good way. This article is a great, if you're thinking the real estate market's going to crash, things are going to come burning down, and you're the kind of person that's going to stand by that, and you're just reaching for reasons to say that, then you know what? This might be an article for you, because this creates additional conflict. The way that they position this is deflation actually makes it worse. Deflation is when consumer prices fall. Sounds great, right? Who doesn't want to pay less for things? Declines at certain times, especially if due to decreasing manufacturing costs, can be great. Consumers have more money they can spend or invest. However, it becomes a problem if it spreads across more segments and the general economy. It becomes a huge tailwind during an economic slowdown. So here's the first argument, this idea they call deflationary spiral. And this is kind of the cycle they explain. Since prices are dropping, consumers wait to see if they can get a better deal. If businesses can't sell inventory, they slow orders for new inventory and investment. This leads to lower employment, which leads to less demand, leading to further price drops, which leads to drop. So, people aren't spending because their money's going up, therefore jobs are falling apart, so in a crumbling economy, it just compounds the issue. That's what I'm hearing here. Again, not enough to kind of be like, all right, well, I that doesn't freak me out, that part, but it's their first point, okay? And then there's an even bigger problem, which this one I think has some legitimacy. This one I'm a little bit more intrigued by. There's an even bigger problem for Canada's heavily indebted households, an increase in the real value of debt. Okay, so if we are not making money, but instead we have such a large debt load, i.e. 200% of GDP, which we've recently heard from CMHC, it's common knowledge that the value of debt can be inflated away, but it's less common that people realize the opposite can happen, right? So you can inflate money in order to devalue the money you're making, but also to devalue what you owe. So like in theory, you can borrow money. This is kind of a play on financing, right? Because you can borrow money for your mortgage, and with inflation, the cost of your mortgage over the next 30 years is going to deteriorate, even if you don't make payments on the principal, because now you still owe the same amount, but the value of the dollar is less. I hope that makes sense. But the same can be argued, and this is a good point, in a deflationary environment, is you better pay your mortgage quicker, right? Because if the cost of that mortgage would, in theory, go up because you're not paying it, and the buying power, the strength of that debt is increasing. This, I think, is a good point, and this is the reason I wanted to share this article. It's a very good argument. I agree. This makes existing debts harder to pay since debt loads and payments are the same, but they exist in the same universe as higher unemployment and lower wages. It also generally means lenders need to raise interest payments because the value of debt decreases. Okay, so anyways, hopefully that gives you some insight. I'm learning about how this deflation thing would work. I wouldn't sweat it too much. Of course, there's a reason there's not a bunch of news outlets publishing this info, but it's a good thing to kind of talk about this point before it becomes a trend, if it does. They say this is the first taste of deflation. CPI fell, listen to this, 0.2%. Like, it's not significant, adjusted, but it was down from 0.9 gain the month before. So it has come down quite a bit, but it's really only at 0.2%. So it hasn't been anything substantial, but it's the first decline since September 2009. So it's good to know what could happen, right? And it says here, to summarize, 1 month of deflation isn't a reason to panic, but it should pique the interest of most investors. It's not a deflationary spiral at this point, but deflation is worse than too much inflation. Maybe for real estate, right? I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm kind of leaning on the deflation side. I'd rather see some deflation. So my question to any of you out there that are maybe a little more educated about this kind of economic impact. I mean, I took economics in university, and I've learned a little bit about this, but I would not call myself an expert here. And I'm going to rely on some of you guys out there. What do you think? Like, what do we want then? Like, we're complaining about it. We complain about inflation. We complain about deflation. Like, what do we want? Do we just want the thing to stay flat? Like, my understanding was slight inflation was a good thing, and deflation on a moderate basis, not that big a deal. But I am open to criticism and hearing from you guys. Let us know, because there's not a lot of news on this stuff, but at least you're getting some of the major news coming out today about what deflation would look like. And I'm learning too. Even if you're not learning, I'm learning. That's good enough for me. All right. We can't skip over and go into the weekend without talking about what was said by our friend Stephen Pelosi. Again, I don't know how to say this man's name, but I talk about him all the time. And he was speaking at a press conference before stepping down next month. And he's pretty much the guy at the Bank of Canada. Like, he sets these interest rates. He makes all these announcements. He's at the central bank, and he prepared a wide range of outcomes. And he's more optimistic. This is what the article says. He's more optimistic than many pundits on the outlook for recovery. This is his quote. And he said, we have to be able to manage the risks around these things. So I'm not going to dismiss. He's talking kind of about these issues. But me personally, I do think on balance, when I'm hearing the flow that I'm hearing is a little too dire, a little bit overblown. So he's kind of saying, I mean, you guys are freaking out. And I mean, I see it in some of the comments. You guys do freak out every so often. Sometimes we just need to chill. Just need to take a little breath and relax. All right. But if I'm going to give the positive, of course, we need to load on the negative. Here it comes. All right. So the question is, are we, right? Like, so if the Bank of Canada thinks, all right, we're doing enough, we're good, relax. I mean, you guys know there's a ton of money coming out right now. Like, they are just printing money. Those machines are going to need to make a second mint at this rate. Like, it's just unreal. It is a good day to be in the armored vehicle business. I don't know if they drive them out in armored vehicles. Maybe that's a business idea for you on the tail end of this. But what I'm seeing, the articles I've seen recently as it relates to the economy have not been that good, okay? This is from my perspective. I'm sure there's good news somewhere. If you dig a little, you'll find that needle. Just keep digging there, Sonny. Air Canada to stop emergency wage subsidy. Thousands of job cuts will leave workers out in the cold, says the union. So here's the thing. I even mentioned when Air Canada got this wage subsidy, we're like, oh, this is amazing. This is going to save the day. You know, they're supporting these businesses and paying for employees. And Air Canada was the prime example, like huge business taking advantage. But then now this article came out in the last day or so. Air Canada will not continue to use the federal emergency wage subsidy and has instead given employees the option of unpaid leave, reduced work hours, or resigning. The union representing the airline flight attendants said Thursday. Canada's largest airline last week plans to cut 20,000 people or 60% of its workforce given the plummeting demand for air travel during the global pandemic. Air Canada has slashed its flight capacity by as much as 95% due to international travel bans and stay-at-home orders. So you can see they're not cutting 95%. They're cutting a big chunk, but they can't even keep up with this lack of demand. As such, most of its employees have no work but have remained on the payroll thanks to the federal wage subsidy that covers up to 75% of the salary costs. Apparently, it's not good enough for Air Canada. And if it's not good enough for Air Canada, it's not good enough for me. I don't think this program is working, guys. So we're not seeing a wage subsidy program working to help stimulate and get people back to work. We're not seeing the commercial rent assistance program working at all, to the point where we've got threats coming from the mayor of Toronto, threats coming from the province, and it's only a matter of time before something has got to give there. I'm going to put some bets on, you'll probably see some freezing on commercial evictions at this point. I mean, at this point, all bets are off. And I'm also seeing articles that the government is doing everything it can to try and keep up. Like, I'll give you an example. We had this new business loan program, this small business loan program that we got an email actually from the Canadian Real Estate Association for, and they were praising them. They're like, oh, this is great. You know, they're going to give some money to small businesses. And essentially it'd be $40,000 and it's due by December. I was talking to an accountant just to kind of get some sense of it. He's saying you owe it by December 31st, 2021, and you only got to pay $30,000 back. So free $10,000, sign me up. Again, just giving money out like crazy. But the problem is the Liberal government on Thursday said it was working to amend a key loan program available to small businesses after a large number of cash-strapped companies said they were unable to access the government support. And I went to look to apply for this thing because why the hell not? I'll take free money if you're giving it. And I couldn't apply for it either for this same reason. Unable to specify when her office would tweak its $25 billion small business loan program, saying only the changes would come, quote, as quickly and as fast as we can go. Like, they're trying to keep up and they can't. But here's the problem. Small companies that do not have a commercial account with a major bank have remained ineligible for the CEBA, leaving many firms without government relief as economic lockdowns enter their third month. I am a self-employed business for real estate. I meet the level of expenses required. I don't know what it is, like 40,000 or whatever. So I meet the expense, I qualify, but you had to have, when I went on RBC to check, you had to have had a small business account separate from your personal account since the beginning of March or something. And I'm like, this is dumb. I messaged actually RBC, still haven't heard back. Like, who knows what they're doing over there? Like, they're probably so busy. And clearly I'm not the only one with this problem, because how many small businesses have small business accounts, right? Like, my business overlaps my personal use. I use my vehicle, I use my phone. Like, it doesn't make sense for me to run a separate account. And so I haven't set it up, and obviously a lot of people haven't. And so this program is also not working. Another program not working. In the meantime, of course, money's flying out the door as these programs try to support Canadians. The Bank of Canada thinks it's enough. The question is do you guys think it's enough? We're starting to see reopenings and hopefully people getting their job back, but this is all over the place, guys, and it's so interesting to watch. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully you guys learned some fun stuff as it relates to Toronto real estate. There are so many things going on. I am hopeful and encouraged by what's been going on in our local real estate market. As far as our economy goes, who the hell knows? But I hope you guys are too, and we're going to continue to keep our finger on the pulse if a second wave comes or additional risks come. In fact, I'll be here tomorrow morning with another podcast because realtors never sleep on weekends, and hopefully get you guys some more great content. I'll see you next time, and enjoy your weekend. Take care. Keep it real.